Welcome back to the Positively Jack podcast, where we dish out real-time strategies on nutrition, fitness, wellness, and lifestyle trends to help you build habits that actually stick. Now, if you've been listening to it for a while, you know that we usually have a guest conversation with me and Jess or a Q&A style discussions, but today's episode is a little bit different. I'm kind of stepping out of my comfort zone in that it is a solo episode. So looking forward to using this a little bit more often to bring quick, actionable insights that can help you on your health, fitness, and nutrition journey. Let us know if you like this style. We're always evolving and wanting to make sure that the podcast is delivering what you need. That said, today's topic is an interesting one and very timely. We are coming up in the mid and end of March. And with that, we have spring break on our mind. A lot of people are taking vacations. And when spring break or vacations pop up, especially one like this, alcohol pops up quite a bit more. And we thought it would be a good thing to give a fitness perspective. So whether you're heading into the beach, planning a staycation, looking to warmer months and social drinking ramps up, we're going to break down what alcohol is, what it actually does in the body, common strategies people can fall to, but that don't necessarily work well, and better ways to navigate drinking overall so it can align with your goals and keeping you healthy. So let's jump in. Before we get into any of the actionable material and stuff like that, I want to say that I am not a medical professional and I'm not a registered dietitian. I'm speaking on the perspective of a coach who helps people make sense of their health and fitness choices. My goal is not to tell you to drink or not to drink. My goal is not to say that drinking is bad. I want to equip you with the knowledge so that if and when alcohol is a part of your nutrition, you feel confident in making the choices that work for you. So let's start with the reality of how alcohol interacts with fitness and performance, right? So the first thing we are going to go over is the reality of alcohol and fitness. So no matter your plans, spring break is always, a good time to check in on how alcohol fits in. So this doesn't just have to be a spring break conversation, although it is timely, but it can apply to summer barbecues, weddings, tailgates, holidays, any social setting where drinking is very common. So we're going to start with the basics, right? Alcohol equals ethanol. Okay. And mind you, again, I'm not going to tell you not to drink or to drink, but the first thing you need to know about ethanol is that it is technically a toxin. Right? Your body cannot store alcohol like it does fats, carbs, and protein, the other macronutrients. Alcohol is technically a macronutrient. So when you drink alcohol, your body makes a really good habit of breaking it down first, right? It cannot store it. So it fast tracks it to the front line. And with that, everything else kind of takes a back seat, including fat metabolism. So if we go beyond the science, though, I want to share a little bit of a personal perspective here. I like to view alcohol as a culinary experience. Okay. So just like food, there's a difference between mindlessly consuming and appreciating it for the craft, the experience, or for that moment or that combination. So for me, that means being very intentional. If I'm going to have a drink, it's about enjoying it, not just drinking to drink. Few examples come to mind. If I go to a really good steakhouse and there's a red wine that pairs really well with the T-bone or sirloin that I'm about to eat, then yeah, I'll absolutely order a glass of red wine. I don't normally drink, but that is a culinary experience. That is a wonderful flavor pairing. Another one that I've used in the past is if I go and get a really good notable burger and some really good fries from some of my favorite places, or maybe a destination place, you can absolutely bet that I will check their craft beer list and see if I can find one that pairs well with it. So when I think about that particular mindset, I think it can be helpful because it shifts alcohol from something that's either restricted or overdoing into something we approach with balance, which is what we hope for all of our nutritional choices. But here's the thing. Even with mindset, right? Like that's my perspective. Alcohol still has very real effects on the body based on the fact that ethanol is what it is and our body processes it a particular way. When we think of it, how it affects our body, number one that I go to is it does disrupt the quality of sleep, right? ethanol is going to be prioritized by that liver. Everything's going to be going fast. I know myself, when I drink alcohol, especially close to bedtime, if I'm less hydrated, I get hot. I'm a little bit more restless. It's just not, conducive necessarily to getting really good sleep. It absolutely can dehydrate you, right? Especially if you are sticking to strictly alcohol and you're not doing some of the balanced choices of water and such in and around that time, especially on spring break. People are hot. They're at the beach. They're at the pool. They're sitting out in the sun all day, and they're quenching their thirst with strictly alcoholic drinks and thereby dehydration. One thing that a lot of people don't realize, and this is something that you can look up, right? It does impact muscle protein synthesis. So how your body repairs and builds muscle, alcohol has a negative effect on that. So these are things that alcohol can affect in your body. And there are also ways that we can, make good decisions or bad decisions that can kind of buffer those negative side effects. But being aware of this helps you make more informed decisions. So with that in mind, I'd like to shift a little bit closer to, strategies that might not be the most optimal. And the reason I want to start here is because these are all too common in our nutrition coaching with work. I've seen people feel very confident in these strategies, and yet they don't realize the big looming gate or gaps in their thinking. And it's by no fault of their own. They're trying really hard to make a genuine effort at controlling something that could be potentially damaging. So a lot of people try to manage alcohol, and in these ways that I'm about to list, it kind of backfires, and I'll give some examples of that. So the first one that we hear a lot of times is, I don't keep alcohol in my house. And I understand why people would do that, right? If it is in your house, it is a temptation. It is available for you to drink in a quote unquote weak-minded moment. But I categorize that as complete avoidance. If you enjoy alcohol, especially, controlled and does well, by completely removing it from your house, you're basically saying you don't trust yourself around it, right? You don't trust it to be within an arm's reach because you don't have necessarily well-practiced boundaries and habits that can prevent you from just reaching for it and having a drink. If the issue is that you can't see it, right? That's no different than if you were, let's say we're running a race, but you were only really effective at the race if you had blinders on to make you look straight ahead. Because you're basically saying, if it's in your peripheral, it's going to affect you and it's going to make you make an action or a reaction to whatever's in your grasp, in your vision, in your visual field. So things where this strategy really bites you in the butt is what happens in social drinking situations, what happens in vacations like spring break, right? What happens when work events pop up? All of a sudden that all gone out from the house goes out the window, and you're in a situation where practiced control hasn't had an opportunity, and now you're in the thick of it. So complete avoidance isn't necessarily the way I would go about it, unless you are just completely not trying to have alcohol ever in your life, which is totally fine. I have several friends who do that. And so realistically, complete avoidance very rarely works. Second one that's very, very common. I only drink on special occasions, right? Or the special occasion rule, which totally makes sense because it akins drinking to a little bit more of maybe a social situation or a celebration, which totally understandable. But special occasions can stack up very, very quickly, especially in the seasons. So we have weddings, birthdays, holidays, vacations. Before you know it, your occasional drinking can turn into a binge drink every other weekend throughout the summer, throughout the winter. There's a lot of periods and quarters and month-long periods that have multiple occasions where drinking might be a part of the fold. And so to put your boundaries on something that is going to pop up that frequently seems a little bit off, not necessarily as optimal as we would want to go. The last one of strategies that I don't think work as well, I only drink once every 2 weeks. So giving a big, broad time constriction and giving yourself a specific time framing window or a frequency restriction. If you tell yourself I only drink on weekends, does that make Friday night feel like an excuse to go all in? Does that mean that you're condensing a time frame that almost seems like you're missing out the rest of the week, and that is your one opportunity to really indulge in this thing that you isolate from yourself, 5 out of the 7 days of the week. Because when you have a scarcity mindset that has a high amount of volume of time behind it, that could lead to something like binge drinking, where you do go 48 hours of drinking because you only drink on the weekends. But it's that buildup and that restriction that makes you anticipate and want and get ready. And then by the time comes for actually having a drink, control goes out the window because you've wanted it through the week, or you've wanted it more frequently, but you've put all the pressure and all the responsibility on the weekend to make sure that thirst is quenched, if you forgive the pun there. And so a lot of people possibly are listening right now, I would hope, and thinking, well, those are some of my strategies. And I'm not saying they aren't, they can't work in certain doses or certain cases, but I do think that we have a lot more optimal ones here that I'll discuss in just a second. So instead of strict rules, we always favor habits, strategies, aka a game plan. So with a game plan, not only are you going for more of a principle and then allowing the methodology to be a little bit more flexible, but it also means that it's practiced, right? You don't go into a match where you haven't practiced your game plan. And so this gives you an opportunity to do that. We're going to break this down into, probably a couple of different categories. So the first one is going to be before you drink. Okay. So, the day starts, nobody's drinking sun up to sundown. And if you are, we ought to talk. But before you drink, one of the top things we recommend to everybody is decide in advance if you're going to drink, how much, and what are your sources. And it doesn't have to be exactly that, but to give yourself a practiced, advanced protocol. I'm going to have this many beers, or I'm going to have strictly these drinks, and I'm going to have a cadence with them. It gives you a guideline. It gives you something that you've kind of practiced in your head. Along with that, and this is something that I preach with everybody in and around alcohol, is hydrate first. A lot of times people will default when they sit down at a bar, when they sit down with their friends, spring break, they will default to what's available in the cooler or what's available on the tap. And I always say hydrate first, because water, it is a great support. Hydration is a great support to countering possible negative effects of alcohol, as well as food. But we're not talking about food. We're talking about alcohol right now. And then there's eating a balanced meal. And I know that sounds kind of odd, but if you get enough protein, fiber, and healthy fats in beforehand, it actually helps slow a little bit of alcohol absorption because your liver is prioritizing those things that you had first. And it also can help keep cravings in check. It can help you feel more satiated, so you don't have to just keep going away at drinks. A lot of times when people feel they might be hungry, it's often could be thirsty. And so by prepping it with water and having a balanced meal, you're addressing that satiety a little bit more before alcohol is even introduced. And so those are our big pieces, before drinking. And realistically, I think that could be where most of the battle is won. Because if you're full and you're well hydrated and you have a plan as to when you drink, that's setting up some really good strategies in and around when alcohol shows up. But now let's take a look at while drinking, because just because you have a plan beforehand, one of my favorite quotes for anybody who is familiar with Mike Tyson, he says, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And so the plan beforehand is always lovely, but once the alcohol hits your lips, you could have a very different response. And so first thing I always recommend, and it's going to go back to the hydration argument, anytime somebody is drinking, I always say alternate it with water. And that way you're getting a nice little 1-to-1 ratio between something alcoholic and something a little bit more hydrating. Simple, but very effective. And it kind of keeps you with a glass in your hand. And that's always a nice thing in a social situation, because then it looks like you have a drink in your hand. Nobody's really worried about you. You're kind of taking that upon yourself, that responsibility upon yourself as to dictate your own drink. If you have a drink in your hand, right, I would prefer that it's a lighter option. Obviously, everybody's got their alcohol, their spirit of choice. Some people like craft beer. Some people like hard liquors like whiskey and bourbon. But if you can go with something a little bit lighter choice, like spirits with 0-calorie mixers or less sugar, drier wines, lower alcohol beer. Those calories and sugars do matter, right? No different than we treated this as a culinary experience. So if you're mindful of those elements, sometimes that sugar is really what puts you over and the alcohol just doesn't help. Or sometimes the bounty behind that big stout of beer that you have is very carby, and realistically, the alcohol, again, doesn't necessarily help. When we think about back a little bit before, when it comes to the having a meal and having hydration beforehand, we mentioned satiety, right? And satiety to me is a good way to kind of gauge how full or how much you need, right? Energy wise, thirst wise. And that kind of comes to our next point as to when you are drinking. If you had that meal before, if you had drank water before, pacing yourself. It's very easy to get caught up in the social or the event dynamic that people are drinking, right? And sometimes when you have a plan to have only so many drinks or so many sources of a drink, it's easy to get swept up in the momentum. And so I always say pace yourself, because the tale as old as time, people think they can sustain more than 1 or 2 drinks in an hour. And that's a very slippery slope, because if you don't have a stopping point, or you don't have a pre-negotiated boundary with yourself, and you start to slip over and over, we all know that alcohol can inhibit judgment. And so if you aren't pacing yourself, you're getting deeper and deeper into the waters of potentially not having as good of judgment as you had prior to drinking and when you started drinking. And that can lead to more, I would say, like mindless calories, right? Where somebody holds back on something, or somebody gets to a point where they're so anticipatory of more, and more is the only thing that's going to satiate. So pace yourself, make sure you're in tune with your choices. Make sure you're in tune with yourself while you're having these drinks, because if you get too far, too gone, that does have a pretty detrimental effect, not only in a hangover and such, but it also makes you lose a little bit more of a trusted autopilot, if you will. We keep tying this back a little bit more to social strategies, and that's because a lot of times social circles or social interactions really do promote quite a bit more drinking, right? If your friends are drinking, everybody's having a good time, it's an easy momentum to get caught up into. But there are some ways in and around a social situation that you can really curb the potential pressure to drink alcohol. And mind you, I do think that if you want to stave off alcohol completely, having that conversation with your friends or your social circle is a pertinent conversation to have. But just so you don't feel like you have to have an exhaustive conversation with each one of your close friends, and maybe even an extension of friends, these next strategies should be for you. Okay. So the first one, and this is actually one of my favorites because there is a huge blossoming market in this particular space, is having a non-alcoholic drink. Between companies like Athletic Brewing Company and even major manufacturers of alcoholic drinks are leaning more into their non-alcoholic options. Having something in your hand, sparkly, looks like a can of beer, looks like a seltzer, it not only can help you avoid pressure, but it also, for anybody that might be on the other side of the losing a little bit of judgment when it comes to pressure, they see you have a can in your hand, or they see you have something that looks like an alcoholic drink. They don't think twice about it. And then that way it kind of puts up that flag of like, hey, I've got my drink taken care of. There's no need to come and address me about it. If in the event you are requested to drink more, right? And this is going to happen in social circles, because sometimes people associate drinking more with being a little bit more fun, being a little bit more loose, letting go a little bit more. And there's a whole idea of, that I would like to unpack there, but I'm only have so many minutes. Now, having said that, though, I love having a scripted one-liner or two in the back pocket to make sure that my immediate answer is the same with anybody that tries to pressure me or push me into drinking more than I am comfortable with. So something as simple as, I'm taking it easy tonight, I've got an early morning, I need to be able to drive from here. They're very definitive statements that put up a very smart consistent boundary that's not aggressive, it's not confrontational, but it just lets people know that your priorities are very well within your control, and that when it comes to alcohol in this particular situation, you have already negotiated that for yourself. The social pressure means next to nothing to you. You just know where you stand on that particular occasion with alcohol, and there doesn't need to be any further discussion. Lastly, and this one could be a bigger, much more meta perspective, if you will, is surrounding yourself with like-minded people. And this is tough because in spring break, especially, you are vacationing. Sometimes it's with families that, you don't get to socialize with as often. Sometimes you're out and about and you get caught up in, big parties and so on and so forth. But if you have people around you in a drinking social situation that know you well, and you share commonalities, you share a like-mindedness in and around things, especially around health, fitness, wellness, nutrition, usually those people can be a much more consistent support and a lot more reinforcing of your own personal boundaries, to where it doesn't seem like you're not trying to, negate the party or negate this thing that alcohol might bring to the table for some. But it really just makes it to where you feel a lot safer making these calls, because those like-minded individuals make you feel a little bit emboldened in making appropriate and well thought out strategic decisions in and around this thing of alcohol that people can very easily lose themselves into and lose their judgment and lose their boundaries. So I think those ones are great strategies as far as like socialization with alcohol. There's not exactly a one size fits all to all of this, but I do think giving a few of those things a try would provide quite a bit of value in the next time you have a social situation with alcohol. The last thing I'm going to kind of go over before some of my final thoughts are going to be after drinking. Okay, so alcohol is still in your system, but it is burning. So there are certain things that you can do to take an approachable, actionable step to make sure that they don't have as long-lasting an effect or as a negative effect. And another one is prioritize sleep. We already know alcohol affects sleep, but if you have a toxin in your body, aka ethanol, rest and recovery is going to make it to where it buffers out of the system, it has its time, and your body isn't being challenged and strained as aggressively as you might have with it still in your system, or with it having an after effect of it being in your system. Speaking of the after effects being in your system, that also brings into the replenishing and the rehydrating. Okay, so if you have a night of drinking and you go to bed, and even if you stayed on top of your water intake all night, you probably need to stay on top of hydration until you feel 100% back to normal, knowing that ethanol, that alcohol has cleared your system. And then the last thing that I think everybody should practice around alcohol is getting back to a routine. And this doesn't just go for alcohol. This goes for a spring break, vacation, this, that, and the other. I think a lot of people have very hard-earned habits and routines in this space. And I think that things like alcohol or vacations can very easily throw a big disruption to that. And some of the hardest things to do is to slowly build back momentum into that routine. So anytime alcohol is involved, the quicker you can move back into your routine, regular sleep, regular hydration, regular nutrition, the more you're going to feel like yourself and not feel like alcohol has to continue, nor does it have that long-lasting potential negative effect. So between pre-alcohol strategies, while you're drinking, social situation specifics, and after drinking strategies, there's a lot here to unpack that I think even one of these strategies, not to mention one in each category, could have a profound effect where alcohol, stays a piece of the puzzle that you like to enjoy, but it's on your terms and it's within your control to where it does not derail you as bad as it could. So I'm going to go into some final thoughts a little bit here. Realistically, alcohol is the thing that's it's specific to everybody, right? Everyone has their own perspective, their own journey when it comes to food, nutrition, training, lifestyle choices. Alcohol is no different. It's a part of that puzzle. And so it's with it being a personal choice, whether you drink or not, I think the key here is the awareness and the intention behind it. So instead of strict rules and these things where you're trying to compartmentalize it so aggressively, incorporating it in the big picture usually helps it to where you can focus on what works specifically for you, as opposed to putting it out of sight, out of mind. And then when it pops up, then you have to deal with it in real time. Whereas you could practice these strategies outside of there, and then it doesn't matter what time it pops up. You know yourself, you know your strategies, you know how you see and utilize alcohol to make it to where you have no problem making a very informed choice. I really hope that I gave you something akin to an aha moment, where you have either learned something, or, you know, there's a strategy that maybe that you've taken before and this kind of refined it and gave you a little bit more. But I'd also love to hear about it. So if you'd like to reach out on social media, you know, I'm at Coach Baycott. We have at Positively Jacked, and we can leave a review here on Spotify. You can leave a review for us when we post it to our other social medias. We are on Facebook. We're on all the standard things, Twitter. Actually, no, I'm sorry. We're not on Twitter. We are on Threads. My mistake about that. Jess is going to get me for that one. But realistically, the reason we bring up these topics and these conversations as we do is because we want to interact and converse with you to make sure you have the most actionable steps possible to make sure your health, lifestyle are within your control and moving in a direction that you feel serves you best. So I appreciate you tuning in to the podcast. And as always, stay positively jacked.